Okay, good morning, everybody. I think we ought to get hopping here on our business. Today we have in front of us several bills, three of them, 1366, 1399, and 1679, all relative to cooperative schools. And we've combined them into one interim study committee to look at, and we did discuss those to a great degree at the last meeting we had. The second bill is 1680, which is a bill dealing with the foundation opportunity budget for adequacy, and we will do that one at 10:30 following this if we can conclude this meeting by 9:30. It is by 10:30, excuse me. And then we'll just roll right into it, seeing this is a interim study committee. We will obviously accept, presentations or testimony during this, not testimony, but technical support, and then roll in to 10:30. I'd like to get the cooperative school board reapportionment bills and cooperative school district withdrawal information and dissolution and repeal. Those are what the three things are all about. Let's get those, try to get those things moving forward somehow in terms of a recommendation. I do have a suggestion that came forth from, initially this suggestion came forth when we were discussing it prior to making the interim study motion. It came forth from the New Hampshire School Boards Association to establish a commission study to more thoroughly investigate and look at cooperative school districts. Since then, I've received last night from the department, they've looked at that recommendation that came in from the School Boards Association and identified perhaps those people that should be on a commission study and looked at the duties and responsibilities of the commission and added to it based upon our discussion at the previous meeting, trying to help us out and derive some kind of a direction here. So I'm going to pass that out to you right now. So you'll see what came in from DOE last night. I got this from Liz, like, must have been about 5:30 in the afternoon. I opened it up at midnight last night and saw it and whoa. And so I'm going to pass it around this way and that. There's ample copies here for the public. A few more. You need a few more that way. Take those. We go that way, Ralph. And I'll save a couple here for those who might come in. You got enough right there? Going all the way around?
Take one.
Oh, okay, sure. Those can go that way, yes. Just a few remarks about the cooperative school districts. In our discussion last week, we had folks presenting to us or testifying or offering us support. And it appeared to me that we have the majority of cooperative school districts, according to what we heard, maybe 2/3 are okay with it the way it is. 1/3 of the ones that have these issues or one district within may have those issues. As far as how do I get out of this, how do we resolve, how to get out of it, etc. And so with that, we came up with the idea that we don't have all the answers for this. And last night, being an old school principal administrator, came out of Maine, we had the same issues over there with SADs, school administrative districts, school unions, which Reedfield is in a school union, which is different than the SAD. And then you have the singular districts like the city of Portland and some smaller. There's a lot of different makeups over there too, and when they went and tried to consolidate and do that, didn't consolidate a lot of districts. One that I know of was Rumford, Mexico, but they are right beside each other on other sides of the Androscoggin River, and they did tie together, seeing they were going to do that probably anyways. When we look at what happened in Vermont, where if they didn't have a K through 12 district, they were all the little K6s and K3s and K8s were told you will try to tie in with a full K through 12. Well, that has been done, but they're done through tuitioning programs, like where my grandkids are going to school in Barnet. Now they tuition to either Linden or St. J Academy. So they have a tuition program. Vermont's had a tuition program way before we had a tuition program. So in looking at where we go, if we say we're going to destroy the cooperative school districts and start over from scratch, we are headed down a road to a tremendous problem and untold consequences. And I just think that's going to be a very difficult process to maneuver through. Although some may think that's the way to go, due to frustration, we haven't been able to resolve this in the last umpteen years. Now, so let's take a look at what we've got here in front of us in terms of the recommendation or the thoughts which we had at the preceding meeting. We were looking at a thorough, well-done commission study. Not that the one done in 2017 wasn't that, but we have been told that it didn't go far enough in a lot of respects. And there are still some districts that didn't even have articles of agreement, 2 of them. One thing we got to note in a commission study, and I was reminded of this by our Jennifer Four, HB 1629 was a bill that passed the legislature this last session. It stipulates that any future commissions, or other types of working groups which involve both non-elected officials and elected officials must have a majority of elected officials on that commission. And the commission can be no larger than 15 members. So when you look at the way that this commission was recommended years ago, that Barrett Christina kindly offered to us during the testimony and all that, the makeup of non-elected officials was way beyond the limit, which would be if you had 15, only 7 people could come from, 8 would have to come from elected officials. I know from my experience, it's tough to get on any kind of study 8 elected legislators. There's a lot of reasons why they can't attend, or it's just very difficult. Many of you are sitting on various groups right now, and you see that happening, like the CTE Council. That's another one which would be revamped with this particular policy that went through, and now it's state law. So when we're looking at that, we can have technical support on any of these commissions. So you would list the active members, the voting members, and there would have to be a majority of elected officials on it, Senate and House. We can develop a commission that has technical support. You can even list those technical support people in a commission report as part of the commission, but they're non-voting members. Everybody get where I'm coming from on this? That was a bill that came out of legislative administration and all that, and it was a bipartisan bill. And I didn't catch it. And that's the way that we lost the Legislative Oversight Committee one year. We didn't catch it. And we had to go and reinstate it this last year. We did that. So in looking at the makeup of the commission study here, if that's the route we're going, and this is what I'd like to do, is look at this first. First of all, I'd like to find out from the committee, are we all on the same page as far as if we're going to make a recommendation up or down that on these bills? Now, we know that anybody that's elected can introduce any one of these bills again. that we can't stop that from happening. But from the Education Committee's perspective, do we feel comfortable in going forward with any one of those bills, or are we on the same page as far as we need to have a better understanding of all the results and actions that might occur as a result of our taking action to?
So Rick, question for you on that. Do you have, if there were to be a, well, we have to do interim study reports for each of the
That's correct.
bills,
Yes.
like you said. What are you thinking the reports would look like if the committee was to move forward with a recommendation for a commission to study this?
If you're going to have a commission study, then you would look on this and see what all the duties and responsibilities that committee would be.
No, but I'm talking about on the
Yeah.
the 2-sentence report.
Yeah, on the 2-sentence report, I would suggest that we say that for this particular bill, which is maybe dealing with dissolution, which is a component of the larger study we want to look at, I would indicate that we cannot support this bill moving forward, as we recommend that a commission study be done to look at these particular issues. And you know, you don't have to go into depth as this would, but you can say dissolution, bonding, all the stuff associated with debt of buildings, articles of agreement. You don't have to list all that, but you can list the broad topics in that last sentence. So I think we can do it in just a two-sentence type report, but suggest that, and then have available as a recommendation, we can have this as a sort of like an addendum to our recommendation as a committee. This is what we would recommend, and it's available to anybody who wants to move forward.
So maybe something, a commission to review and propose changes to RSA 195.
Yeah.
I mean, just keep it at a 30,000 foot level.
Yeah, that's fine with me. The wording of that, the study report does. But I would like to also say, though, that we did look at this.
Yeah.
And that we do have a recommendation regarding the commission membership and duties, responsibilities associated with that commission, or something such as that. So that this is available if that's what we want to do. We can discuss that when we're doing that on the 24th, because that's where we make the final decision.
Right.
But the issue right now, are we in favor of, all of us, the idea that we would do the commission angle rather than, all of them would be down then. And then we would have this same kind of recommendation for all three of them.
Right.
Yes, Representative Tanner.
I agree that we need a commission. It seems like all we're focusing on is dissolution, and you said, there are.
That's just one topic. Let's look at them.
That, as I said before, the co-ops were developed by incentives from the Department of Education, and I, for one, feel that there should be at least some discussion about how we can support co-ops in order to keep them going, because with the economy of scale, once these people break up, just like Lemster and Goshen, I mean, it just costs them a lot of money just to run the schools because it's so small. So I think that, there needs to be two sides to this coin, not only dissolution, but also what can be done to help the ones that want to maintain, or even the ones that want to dissolve and realize that they can't. What can the state do to offer them some incentives to keep up their cooperative districts?
So if you look at this report that I got from this is DOE and the School Boards Association. DOE and Dinah's here today. This came in from Liz. Is this something that there's been some discussion over at DOE in regard to what we should do as a subcommittee here on this? Anybody from DOE want to speak to it? Yes. Good morning.
Morning. So I received that above my request from Barrett.
Yeah.
Understanding that he had shared that with you, I think, almost a year ago.
Yes, he did. The button, yeah, yeah.
Now it's on. I had requested that from Barrett Christina, understanding that he had submitted it to you, I guess, a year ago, and we reviewed it. Commissioner and I reviewed it. We made some revisions to it. If you can, I can provide you a black line between what Barrett had submitted a year ago and how we revised it. I think we revised the composition, but also parsed out some of the items that we would think would be subject to review and discussion by that commission.
Thank you, Liz. And that's in Roman 2 on this report, which
Yes.
we have here for and I did take the opportunity last night to add in one more to that.
Okay.
But I'd like to, if we could, walk through these item by item by item, because we have a little time here, and see if this answers some of the things, Representative Tanner, that you were just raising. It shouldn't be just how to get out. You know, obviously when we're talking many other aspects of education, like in Building A, we look at consolidation as a key component of receiving and rating applications. In other words, you know, you're not splintering and going to cost more dollars. You're trying to do a savings of dollars in terms of administration and functioning as a school with consolidation. So, that's what I'd like to do, is take like 2A right now, Roman 2A, look at that, and then is that something that we would recommend as a duty or responsibility of the commission? Yes, Representative Cordelli.
Yes, I think that's a key area to look at. I think that a lot of the frustration over the years has been in that area. Many, if not most of the bills we've received over the time that I've been here, which is a considerable number,
Yeah.
have been related to the withdrawal process. And it's almost impossible for a smaller district to withdraw from a cooperative, given the majority vote of the entire cooperative. So that's a key area, I think, that needs to be resolved.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I would just
Yes.
offer that we put something in there about sustainability and support for co-ops, that it be explored.
I'm hearing what you're saying, but let's save what we think should go in here as an addition after we go through all these elements. Sustainability of a co-op and the importance of a co-op may already be in here as one of those statements. I haven't read through it that thoroughly, so, but keep that, you know, write that down right now, sustainability of co-ops in the interest of education. So, yeah, 1/3 of the districts, that's usually what part of the issue is. You know, how do I get out? Children in our district aren't getting what they deserve. It's costing us more money, et cetera, or whatever the issue is. It's usually about how do I withdraw from the co-op. So obviously that should be a process that's looked at. B, the powers and review authority of the State Board of Education in the withdrawal process. Sort of linked to A. B, or C, the educational impact of withdrawal from a cooperative school district on the educational opportunities for the students impacted by withdrawal or dissolution of cooperative school districts. Yes.
Yeah, I can see this happening, especially the high school level where town moves, and has a different high school going to, but their students are in the bigger high school at the co-op with subjects that aren't being supplied in the new thing they're going. So one of the agreements could be that they stay until they graduate. I mean, we've done that in an area agreement type thing. So that's one of the things on the educational impact. Where they're going and are the subjects going to follow them?
Yeah, that's all related.
Yep.
Any discussion on C further? Going down to D, educational options for students who are impacted by the withdrawal of dissolution of cooperative school districts. That's sort of like what you were looking at.
Oh, yeah.
That D, the options, you know,
Oh, yeah.
do I stay or do I go somewhere else? And then are there any places else to go to? That has to be approved by a receiving school. E, appraisal and valuation of real estate and facilities of existing cooperative district. That's a huge issue right there. You know, how do we divvy up debt? How do we divvy up what you have put into the buildings, the structures? Are you willing to leave without having to, you know, demand a certain amount of money come back to you as a leaving district? Those were financial issues that we heard from the counsel for state attorneys. The attorney was from Drummond, wasn't he? We heard last week, Shaughnessy, Jim. Yeah. F, no, let's see. E, appraisal and valuation, okay, of a state and facilities of the existing cooperative district. F, appraisal and valuation of other non-real estate facilities, assets of the existing cooperative district, a lot of financial issues. The legal impact of withdrawal of pre-existing district or dissolution of the district on any existing collective bargaining agreement. There are a lot of implications there. Upon dissolution of a co-op or withdrawal from a cooperative district, how assets, including but not limited to facilities, contractual agreements, and other tangible property are divided between the cooperative district, any withdrawing district, and or the pre-existing districts. I, representation on a cooperative school district board and how board members are elected, board representation allocated between pre-existing districts, etc. That was an issue that I think came from Representative Melissa Litchfield here, who had a district that wanted representation. J, surveys and public opinions of parents, students, and community members of pre-existing school districts, and a consideration of the issues and considerations that drive those opinions, including but not limited to educational opportunities, availability of co-curricular and extracurricular activities in cooperative districts, tax rates, disparity of costs per pupil, and equalized valuation of real estate, among other issues. That's a lot in that one right there. Deals with so much. Needs to be looked at. All of it needs to be looked at. K, on the other page, identify key required elements in cooperative school articles of agreement and require all cooperative school districts to have approved articles of agreement. I stuck that one in. That was one that didn't come from Liz, but we know there's several districts that don't have articles of agreement. So all those policy decisions are based upon what? Clearly state law, but where are all the districts within the co-op? Do they all agree with what's going on? I don't know how those other co-ops that don't have agreements, how they function, how they review those, will review what they're doing every so many years. And L, any necessary revisions to RSA 195 or any other statute that may uniquely impact a cooperative school district. So that's kind of a wide open deal. Any other issue which the commission deems relevant to the objective of the study. Now, Representative Tanner.
So in the one that you added about the articles of agreement,
Yeah.
I don't know if maybe it's a silly thing, but I would put down written, because I think if they don't have articles of agreement, there's been like an agreement, but it's not been written down. And so maybe if you put written in there, then it.
Well, I think that's very valuable and kept. So a lot of these articles we can't find. You know, we've gone to DOE and asked, they can't find them. I don't know how those districts are functioning.
On an agreement of some sort.
A handshake. Yeah, it would be written. And
Are the ones that don't have written articles of agreement, are they functioning? Are they the ones that wanted?
I honestly can't tell you. Maybe there's somebody here that can inform us. There were 2 districts that don't have articles of agreement. Was Milford one? I can't remember from our discussion previously. It came up in the discussion.
Yeah.
In fact, I think Barrett was the one who brought it up. No, was Barrett here? Yes, he was. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, and how they're functioning now on the handshake.
Rick, I would assume there is some issues of past practice that would cover the questions that Representative Cornell is talking about that has been there for years. And the past practice is a common law issue where there's not a written agreement.
Mm-hmm. So, the last M, any other issue which the commission deems relevant to the objective of the study is kind of a wide open, you can study other issues that are pertinent to cooperative school districts. Looking at the benefits of a cooperative school district, the cost savings of a cooperative school district. And that's all I would think be part of this study.
Yeah, so Rick,
Yeah.
I think one of the things that jumps out at me though on this is, and I think this is what Linda was talking about too, is it's very, very prescriptive and detailed when it comes to withdrawal or dissolution. JK, except, and then you've got that sort of, and anything else that you might want to, come before the commission as well. But being so prescriptive when it comes to withdrawal, I wonder if maybe, we could sort of, back out a little bit and look at the commission's duties shall be to I like the one that you put in, identify key elements and required school districts, required elements of cooperative school articles of agreement. I think that's an important issue there. Mm-hmm. And then, terms surrounding not just withdrawal and dissolution, but what if another pre-existing school district wants to join, something around that. And then we currently have a lawsuit pending in Superior Court, the Rand suit, which challenges funding of cooperative. It's specifically around cooperative school districts. I believe all the plaintiffs, or the initial plaintiffs, were co-op school district members of co-op school districts. And that could certainly contribute to criticism of current cooperative school districts if let's say taxpayers in one town are paying a significantly higher local school property tax rate than people in other towns, and so perhaps that should be rolled into this as a high level thing to look at, particularly in view of the fact that we've got a pending court case.
I think that's extremely important. And perhaps when we look at the very first Roman numeral 1, where it says there established a commission to study issues related to cooperative school districts, we could add in another sentence or two in there to give an overall purpose of the study, which is broad enough to include some of those topics of which have just been discussed this morning, to show the rationale behind why we went there, or why we have them, what's the benefit that comes from them, we understand that two of the bills which we have before us were dealing with reapportionment, withdrawal, and the last one, and repeal cooperative school districts. So the bills which we had in front of us were really at that withdrawal and disillusionment. And I think that's, from what I hear, by way of all the testimony over the years, those are the big issues. How do we reapportion membership on these cooperative boards? How do we get out of it if we don't like it? How do we get out of it if they're trying to change the articles of agreement, where it's now, we used to be maybe based on your finance, 100% ADM, average daily membership. Now they want to throw in 50% ADM and 50% property valuation. All those things are causing concerns out there when you, so like we said at the very beginning, we don't want to get down to the nitty gritty and all this stuff, but I think we got to convey to the commission some of the issues which have become for this committee in the past, and here they are.
Yes. I just want to mention to part of the dissolution, some of it should be done to take care of the situation like in Derry. They are cooperative school districts of themselves. Because it was Derry and Derry Village or something, and that all went away, but they still are a cooperative school district. So the dissolution part of it needs to be done, like, hey, if there's nobody left, it's automatic or something to that effect. Because Derry doesn't know how to get rid of it, you know.
We don't know how to get rid of ours either up in Haverhill. We're a cooperative district of one town
Yeah.
with 7 at-large members on the board. Yes, Representative Tanner.
I'm kind of drawing a blank here, but with the cooperative school districts, one of the things on my campaigning is that I've had several questions about would it be more efficient and cheaper for schools to join in cooperatives, or, you know, to have the SAUs not be all broken up into little itty bitty SAUs like they are now. So I think there's not only, you know, the louder voice obviously is for the breaking up of cooperatives because somebody's mad. But on the other hand, I think there are people out there in the communities who are looking towards school funding savings by joining together either, you know, the SAU, which isn't a cooperative, but then with cooperative districts as well. So I that's why I think we should, when we have an overall study, I think we should look at both ways.
So you're almost getting into the arena that you're looking at the entire educational structure and organization in the state of New Hampshire. That's what some of the other states have grappled with. That's what Vermont did, and how do we get away from all the duplication of administration in these? How many districts do we have? In of the 30 co-ops, there was 174 or so small districts that are part of the co-ops. And every one of them has to have a certain administration and all that. There's duplication for sure. And then how do you divvy up the costs of that administration? Then there's a fight on that.
I think because we're on the western side of New Hampshire, and we get a lot of news from New Hampshire or Vermont radio and TV and newspapers, that kind of sparked that conversation, since Vermont, really looked at the reorganization and tried to see how they could entice people to join those small school districts together. So I think that's where it's coming on my side.
Representative Woodcock.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I haven't been privy to the ongoing study the committee's been working on. I do understand that the 3 bills that you're focusing on do deal with dissolving, but I have to support Representative Tanner's concern. When I look at this as a first day in, first thing you gave us 10 minutes ago, the first piece, the first item number 1, it talks about issues related to cooperative school districts. It's as the primary focus. It doesn't say that's number 1, but it doesn't have anything there, as Linda has indicated, that talks about the positiveness, how to structure, all those things. Everything here, when you get to 2, 3, and 4, are valuable for the disillusionment. So I do think, since the number 1 piece that DOE put in there on this commission should include the positive ramifications of and options of cooperative school districts. So I would support Representative Tanner's concern that as we go through, if it's the commission is going to look at cooperative school districts, there should be also the fair presentation on the other side of the board of how towns can do that. That's all.
So
But I'm
perhaps when
outside.
Representative Woodcock, when we make our recommendations up or down, that we don't have to hand in the recommendations like this in a legislative fashion. We could put down an overall purpose statement for why we're making this, but then have some bullets, not in any prioritization order, but some bullets that need a look at.
Okay, thank you.
That might be one way of doing it, because we're not recommending this legislation. We're dealing with the old legislation. And so, but we want to make a recommendation that we didn't act positively saying, yes, the bill goes forward, simply because there's too many of these type of issues associated with it that we're not ready to make that, recommendation one way or the other yet.
Okay.
Commission study.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah. Further discussion on this one. Representative Leckus.
I don't know that we have to put all the positives, but I certainly think we need to put how to join a pre-existing co-op and how to form a new co-op as part of the list of things that we're recommending being looked at.
Rick? I absolutely agree with that. And I think if we're looking to not recommend the current legislation or recommend future legislation, form a commission to take a comprehensive look, to review and make recommendations for things including withdrawal and dissolution, joining and formation. You can't have the withdrawal and dissolution discussion without a joining and formation discussion too. And the articles, I think that was a really good catch. And I would put funding in there too, since it's all part of it. And I think those are four very broad categories that I think would provide a decent framework for a piece of legislation down the road.
Okay, I got those down. Joining and formation and funding.
And the articles.
And in the articles, yeah.
Rick?
Yeah.
Rick.
Representative Miley.
I do think what we've discovered this morning too is that obviously those who've come before us in the past have had issues, had problems. What has been lacking in the conversation though is where is it working? And I think that's the last several comments of committee members here have indicated that there are places where they are in fact working, and what is the best practices within those co-ops that might help other co-ops that are struggling. So I think the expansion of the issue of the study of co-ops is really beyond just the withdrawal, but how in fact how should they be working? Where are they working? Where are their problems? And trying to identify that whole scope of issues. Thank you.
Yeah, we have about 2/3 that haven't really communicated with us. And so are we to assume that's all fine? Or are their articles of agreement, are they working? Because there are all these articles, we've looked at what we could find, and we've looked at a good 15 or 18 of them in past years. We found they're all different. And some are very comprehensive. Some are like, a 1 or 2 pages, and a lot of, make your mind up as you go on. So where are the best practices occurring, and which are the articles of agreement that really work? We haven't gotten all those. We don't know, and we don't even know those that are working well. So this all makes sense. I think we need to, find all this information out before we throw it all out with the bathwater, the whole works.
And Rick, to your point on the articles, I think it ties in with Mel's point on what are best practices in terms of operations, because those two things really, I think can help, advise how to move forward with what would be the things to have in articles. Because as your friend Bill Ardinger said in the Concord Monitor yesterday, he was on the Charter Commission for Concord, and the Concord's charter. It's something that comes into play during the breakup. It's not relied on for normal, day-to-day operations, and so so having good articles that are both strong in terms of when there's conflict, would also, I think good articles would be, would be good to have strong articles in terms of, solid operations as well.
Yeah, and you got to identify those key elements that are within those articles, and they may all apply to every district, but in different ways because you're different sizes, rural, urban, demographic size of enrolled population, donor versus non-donor, all that. Representative Cordelli.
Thank you. With the articles, I think one of the issues is requiring a periodic review of the articles. Put that into statute, but there's a fundamental problem also with the articles because if they are, again, voted on by the entire cooperative district, again, it's the larger towns that are going to dominate. And if the smaller towns who have issues cannot make an impact in terms of the articles and changes to the articles, we're back to the same situation we are currently in.
Right, but that's up to the commission that's more,
Right, but just- it's an
but that's a point
Yeah.
that the commission would need to look at.
It's all about local control. And that's the difficult one to get around. Some of the articles read that if you change these articles during the time that we've reapproved them, maybe every 5 years, 10 years, some have never done that. If you change the articles without our approval, we have a free ticket to get out of the co-op. There is one district like that that is about ready to pull that card. So I think this whole study is very important. And we ought to move on it. And hopefully, if we can change, and summarize some of these instead of putting the laundry list, perhaps. If Representative Tanner, did you have your hand up quickly? Yeah.
Yeah, I just to go back to the commission as a whole, the membership of it. And I know because you said there is a law now that you have to have
Yeah.
more legislative people on the commission. But as I go down through the commission, there's only one outside group, the state school board, or not the state school board, but the school board association. The rest of the ones, other than legislative, are all appointed either by the DOE or the governor. I think we need more diversity on that commission. So I don't know how much that's going to be part of the recognition or recommendation or even the final bill, but I would definitely look at the representatives on there. I think there's a lot more people that should be on there than that are outside of the DOE and outside of the appointment of the governor.
See, on this, that was the next point I was going to get at as far as conversation. If you look at the makeup of what is on this paper that we received right now, you're going to see 3 superintendents, and you're going to see 2 school board members. There's 5 right there. And if you're only allowed to have 7, if you have a commission of 15, 7 of which are going to be non-elected officials, 5 of them already been reserved for the superintendents and for school board people. But there's others that we've heard from, just like Jim, who testified from the attorney perspective. You have what about a finance director or a business manager of a co-op? And informing folks on the nature of how business is handled financially. What about the Department of Revenue Administration? Should they be involved? There should be some from DOE. So the makeup, this is where you're going to have technical support. We're not going to be able to get them all on. What about the parent who is upset? Well, I don't if it has to do with the cooperative before you put them on there. It's just, I'm upset because I'm not getting special education services. I don't think that's going to be relative to this study. However, the broader picture is that, how's that affected the academic achievement of my student? That may be an issue which, we want to know about too.
Sure, and I think all of those things, Rick, you know, and I think this is a strong point about having a commission, maybe even a multi-year commission to do this, so that it can have substantial public comment, where people can share those concerns and have ample time to seek out testimony from from the commissioner, the DRA, and from other stakeholder groups that are involved in co-op districts.
So would it be wise for us to, when we're looking at this, we should also be writing in the technical support shall include, or we're not going to be writing the bill, but in.
Yeah, I don't think you need to make it that.
I don't want to get prescriptive, but if you look at the commission which we previously had, and the membership, you had Jim Grenier, so he's from the House. You had Ken Weiler from the House, Vincent Migliori, Department of Education, Liz Brown, were you on the school board at that? You were school board at that time, but you weren't DOE. No. Kathleen Egbert, superintendent appointed by the governor. Carl Ladd from the School Administrators Association. Mary Heath, elected official. John Reagan, elected official. Stephen Hamilton, DRA. Peter Belo, school board member appointed by the governor. Mark Halloran, Halloran, superintendent appointed by the governor. Barrett Christina, school board association. Donna Green, public member with experience withdrawing from a cooperative school district. I think that was Croydon, wasn't it? Donna Green?
No, Timberlane, I think.
Timberlane? Okay. That was the makeup of it. And we heard from Jim O'Shaughnessy, New Hampshire Council of School Attorneys, that he felt there needed to be more financial knowledge on that board dealing with some of these issues he discussed at the last meeting. And he was going to get back to us. I tried calling him several times. It's hard to get through to him.
But that can be done during.
Yeah. Rep. Zambone.
Yeah, thank you. One of the problems is the size of commissions. I think 15 is pushing it. You need to also get a quorum. The thing is, like a lot of bills, and the following will be invited. They don't have to be permanent members of the commission. They can be invited, people like from the DRA or whatnot, to discuss specific items. But over 15, you're getting to be, it's going to be hard getting, I've seen commissions come up with like 33 members, and that's utterly ridiculous. 15 is, I think, the top limit we should have for at least getting a quorum and getting, with more than 15, you might not even be able to agree on anything. So I think 15 is fine.
Liz, do you have a comment on this?
Just want a point of clarification. So on my list, the recommendation was that certain folks were appointed by the State Board of Ed, not by Department of Ed. Those are different entities.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that the commissioner and I noted as we were going through this is the State Board is given several obligations with respect to cooperative districts. And the state board has really been sort of outside of the realm of any prior study commission, and they at least need to be part of the conversation. So maybe either by representative of the state board on that commission, or have some participation. So just want to make that clarification that those folks are not going to be appointed by the agency, but were actually, the suggestion was they be appointed by the State Board of Education. And then the importance of including a discussion of the obligations of that state board, because, for example, they have an obligation to review the withdrawal plans that are submitted. And as you know, there's an issue right now before the state board regarding, a vote to withdraw that didn't go through successfully. So the state board certainly has obligations under the current statute. So probably needs to be part of the conversation, but also part of the issues that are discussed to make sure that the duties and obligations that they are given are clearly defined and things that they can, perform. Because if it's vague and unclear or not clear direction, it's leaves things open.
Thank you. Yes. Representative Ellison.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a comment on the composition of the commission. It seems, and people have said this, but I'm just supporting it, it seems very much skewed toward the executive branch. If you include the Department of Education and the governor, they're appointing 9 people of this commission. As I read it, we get basically the legislative branch gets 4 members. And in terms of sort of the division in terms of responsibility, and I'm aware of some of that between the state board and the actual Department of Education, given the current meeting of the minds between the Commissioner of Education and the chair of the State Board of Education, I'm not sure there's be a whole lot of difference in terms of the recommendations that came forward. So I think this membership, if it's capped at 15, which it is, has to be much more balanced than what's showing up on this sheet here.
And by balanced, do you mean that, for example, if it's a 15-member commission or some odd number less than that, the majority is going to be elected representatives and senators? Is it possible that an elected representative could also come on with a lot of understanding about school boards, having been a school board member, or withdrawal process could have been involved with that, or could have been involved with a co-op that works just, wonderfully. I think that when I looked at the list initially, how we had it in the years past, the membership was kind of siloed. From this organization, I'd rather see people appointed to a commission and find out what do they bring to it as an individual, not just because they're elected or not elected, but what do they bring that's going to, and what do we need on there to have a good understanding of discussion? If you don't, or the knowledge of who to contact. I think that's the important part. So we got what kind of resources we'd want in all these different people.
Okay.
Art?
I should have said, I certainly agree with your intention, the intention of the people here, of including as many knowledgeable people in this process as possible, in terms of technical assistance and committees and so on. What I'm raising is, what is the composition going to be of the group that makes the final decision? When the votes are taken, really doesn't make any difference what the technical assistance committee said. It's the people who are on this commission who will make a final determination, ultimately, I assume, on legislation or a recommendation for legislation. So that's my, I just want to be clear that I certainly support the idea of lots of people being involved in the process. Thank you.
Right, thank you. I think we're now discussing what the future bill is going to be. Not, I think we need to stay with this thing on the interim study, which we pretty much all agreed to that will be it. We have plenty of time to discuss what the bill's going to be when we get the bill. So I think we're going further than we should be right now.
Representative Tanner.
I would respectfully disagree about individuals versus organizations. I think that when you have like a Carl Ladd from the Superintendent's Association, that person then represents the general feeling of superintendents in the state. If you have just one superintendent from one particular area, they're just representing their particular area, which then can get skewed. So when you do a statewide commission, I think you need to look at a mix of maybe an individual, but also have representative from the organization, just like you're having the School Boards Association with Barrett Christina.
Further discussion on this one? I think Representative Bowman's correct. This would be a decision that needs to be made, but I think the makeup of these commissions is extremely important. And I'm sure that the governor in past, when he's appointed people, has tried to look at that in terms of people that are, bring some knowledge. He certainly did that when he appointed Bill Ardinger to the commission that you had, Representative Myler. Is there anything else on this that okay, let's look at the individual three bills right now. So in that first bill, let's see, bring this up. Okay, in the first bill, which is 1366, relative cooperative school board reapportionment, what's the feeling, up or down on that? Is there anybody wanting this to move forward? We got to make a recommendation to the full committee.
Rick, here's this sort of getting back to what we started to talk about at the top of this. If we're not recommending either of any of these bills in their specifics, but instead are recommending that the legislature assemble a commission to do a comprehensive review, then I think having a 3-sentence report that you can draft on the fly right now could give us a sense of how we want to vote on these bills, because I think maybe this could go to, I'll just put it out as a straw man, that the committee does not recommend this bill in specific, but does recommend, and this would be the common for all three, does recommend a comprehensive commission to study issues, to study matters of cooperative school districts with respect to at least the following areas: withdrawal, dissolution, joining and formation, articles of agreement, funding, and best practices in operation, and just sort of leave it at that.
That's exactly right.
And not get into membership, not get into.
We need to take action on each bill, though, and we're going to have to make that same motion for each bill.
Right. But if that was it, if we knew what that one sentence or what that one,
Okay, so then what we need to do right now, then, just to make this easy so we don't string this thing on too much longer, we'll make that motion and make it appropriate to each of the three bills. When we have that motion, if we all agree in that process, that's what I'd like to hear right now, because if I don't see that now, we haven't made a decision to pass on to the executive session. And that's what we want, when we exec the three bills. So is everybody favorable behind what was just mentioned by Representative Cordelli?
Yes, since this is a subcommittee, but a committee of the whole,
Yeah.
and on the 24th, we have a committee of the whole, do we have to have a vote today? There are a number of members missing today. Wouldn't it be better just to delay any vote until we have a true executive session with the committee of the whole?
No, we are in a subcommittee, and as I mentioned yesterday, that even though the folks, unless we haven't finished studying the bill, but I think at this point with this bill, three bills, I think there's nothing else to be gotten. And so we should make a recommendation at this point in time as a subcommittee. We're going to have to do that. We could do that on the 24th at the same time, but my feeling is that we're all pretty much going to be on the same page here anyways right now.
So, Rick, I'd be happy to put a motion on the table.
I'll second.
Okay, so we will, motion made by Representative Luno, second by Representative Bohm.
So that and this applies to all three bills. I don't have the numbers in front of me.
Yeah.
That while the committee does not recommend this bill for further legislation, it does recommend the legislature assemble a commission to study matters involving cooperative school districts.
That's your first sentence. Second
Yeah,
sentence.
yeah. These matters shall include withdrawal and dissolution, joining and formation, articles of agreement, funding, and operating best practices.
And I would put other matters as pertain to cooperative school districts.
Yeah, that's.
That would be the last
Yeah.
point of that.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, all in favor? We didn't have any discussion on that. We're done with that now. Okay,
And that's times 3.
that's times
like
three.
times
So we're
three.
done that.
All right.
Those 3 bills are taken care of. We're going to take a 5-minute break here before we get into the next bill.
I'm just gonna copy it right now.
Did you get a copy of what he just said? Glenn? No,
And
I thought you were writing.
other matters.
Okay, so you've got it though, right?
be or for the town.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and start on 1680. Subcommittee interim study work on this bill has, as a result of commission studies in the past, task force studies in the past, and here we go in terms, we are now trying to come up with some resolution on 1680 here in terms of the recommendation from this committee. I passed out several sheets here, which I asked this sheet right here, the one which has all these districts on it. Yesterday, I met with Jennifer Four to ask for information. One of the concerns, it's just one that's I've thought of a lot lately, is that we have some districts that are wealthy districts, and we know that, we saw it from the commission report too, where there were outliers on just about everything we did, or inliers, whatever you want to call them, and where, for example, there's a high number of dollars that are driven towards and make up the cost per pupil, and the equalized valuation per pupil is also high. However, their achievement scores are not where you think they should be, given the nature of that community. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I understand a lot of variables. Some are funding, some are non-funding variables. And so what I'd like to do is just take a moment, if we can here, because before we do any kind of recommending or moving forward, I'd like to have today everybody here at the table that's got either a made-up position, you know, already you've already resolved where you are on this, or you haven't, to put your cards on the table, and please, let's have an honest discussion right now so we can try to address some of the critical issues that the 1680 was bringing forward. And there are some issues in 1680 that are very pertinent and apropos to where we need to go or where we want to go in terms of learning in the state. So I'd like to look first at this small little sheet which was put together. It comes from iPlatform, the iExplore from DOE. Jen, do you have a moment that you could come on up, please? Jen, in this, you were able to put this together for me just the other day, dealing with these various districts. And the districts we know, some are like if you're a co-op and there's towns or districts within the co-op, the towns are listed in several different, they're listed as a separate district because they might only be a K3, a K4, a K6, but they're also listed under the co-op as well. But then going across equalized valuation per pupil, you can see what that is in terms of the formula that we were giving some fiscal capacity disparity aid. That's what I like to call it. We were looking at a figure to start at a starting point to move downwards, and as we went downwards towards the lower level of equalized property valuation, the amount that they receive per pupil increased. Average cost per pupil, proficiency in math, proficiency in English language arts, whether it's economically disadvantaged students based on free and reduced, the percentage, and the enrollment numbers, and then the median household income is also listed there. And these are all components that come into our thinking on how to direct monies in any formula to where there is need for that money. And also as an attempt to see if the money which is being received is being used efficiently, towards the area of the we measure that outcome which we're looking for. And in the commission study, there were, I believe, 3 outcomes which we were measuring from: the statewide assessment, attendance, and graduation numbers. Am I correct on that? Yeah. And so it was those 3. In statute, we have a number of indicators which we measure that one. Everything from the ASVAB to, the going on to post-secondary education. There's a number of them, discipline in the schools, etc. So Jen, could you walk us through this a little bit, try and explain what the different shades of black and gray are here?
Sure. So what I did was pull all of the data points from the iPlatform on the Department of Education's website, except for the median household income that comes from the U.S. Census Bureau. The iPlatform produces information by district, and there are 164 districts that are listed here. This is all 2019 data. And like Representative Ladd had mentioned, where there is a cooperative school district, Representative Cordelli mentioned that Exeter is a good example, where Exeter cooperative is, I think, a 6 through 12 cooperative. Then each of the member towns are listed separately with their K to 6 or K to 5 districts. But all the data is district level data. So the proficiency is by the specific district. In terms of the shading, what I did is once I compiled the data, I just used the quartile function in Excel to break down the quartile, so you can see relative from district to district which conditions are perhaps more favorable. The flaw, or what I think you should keep in mind when comparing the districts, is it doesn't account for district population. So the quartile data isn't going to align perfectly with statewide average data because you're comparing, in some cases, an 80 student district with a 13,000 student district. So some of that, it's not, it compares things differently than if you are looking at all the student performance in the state. So if you look at page 6 of the packet, it shows how those quartiles are broken down for each category. And I also noted the statewide averages for each category. And then the last page gives you information, again, from iPlatform that defines each of the indicators that are in the spreadsheet. Obviously, on the printout, you can't see the color coding, so I am going to send you around electronically the spreadsheet so that you can have that visual impact better than what you can see here. And it will also allow you to sort by each of the indicators listed.
Okay, are there, Representative Bowman?
Thank you. I did a similar thing many years ago on education funding. And one of the same reasons I will not vote for any funding that includes median household income. And a good example of that is, for example, the town of Litchfield. Both parents work, as compared to Manchester, which has a lot of single parent houses. And if you look at theirs compared to median male income or median female income, the median household is nearly the same. If you look at it for Litchfield, for example, the median, you add the two together and you get the median. So it's not a fair comparison to use median household income anyway. So I just wanted to bring that up. And for example, Hudson, which is nearly identical to Litchfield, it shows a nearly half. And that's because there are probably a lot of single provider households in Hudson as compared to Litchfield. So it's not a fair comparison. I mean, both parents, like in Litchfield and a lot of the other towns, you see the high numbers, is the only reason it's high is because both parents have to work in order to live where they're living. So, I mean, that's why I will never vote for anything that has median household income, because I went through this years ago when we were doing the same type of thing, and it's not a fair number. And why isn't dairy on the list?
This is completely everything that came out from the iPlatform data. I didn't add or take away any of the districts.
They're missing.
It looks like they're at a pay break. Like for some reason.
Yeah, I mean, I can double check, but yeah.
Might not have ended up on.
So Rick,
Yes.
just a question on Ralph's comment there, and I agree with what he said, and nothing in 1680 relies on median household income as part of the funding formula, but our current and what's being proposed, well, it uses free and reduced price lunch. Right, which is different than median household income. It's a poverty indicator or socioeconomic status indicator for students, and it's very clear from the. I'm also looking at the same database that Jen used, and I mean, we had a really nice presentation of it from the department a couple weeks ago. And just looking at the economically disadvantaged students percentage versus proficiency in math, and there's it's a very strong correlation there with students from economically disadvantaged backgrounds performing significantly worse on our statewide assessments than students in more affluent households.
So if we look at a town like a Molten Borough, and I'm not picking on it, but I'm picking on it only because I'm looking at their equalized valuation at $7 million per pupil. And their average cost per pupil is $25,687. And you look at the performance in mathematics. What was the state average in mathematics? Can you recall, Jen?
I think it's 49.
49. They're below the average. So they're 42%. If in fact I'm concerned that how do we direct dollars to assist those communities which have low performance in a certain subject area or area of learning, yet they have the ability within their community to, do that themselves. So I guess that's a question, Dave.
Yeah. And Rick, I mean, I think that's something that we spent a lot of time in the year 2000 on Zoom talking about, and I think we focused a lot of discussion around the Supreme Court decision that came out of the Londonderry lawsuit, and where I think it. I'm not recalling the specific language. I know it's in the commission report, but I think some critics have used the Londonderry decision as to support a first and last dollar approach to funding an adequate education, but I don't believe the Londonderry decision. I'm not a lawyer. Necessarily goes to that effect. But very important, I think, for the state to look at its obligation to providing the last dollars in making sure that every district has access to the resources they need, and I think that would apply to a lot of the underperforming districts where students are performing below the state average, and making sure that that they have the dollars to fund an adequate education. And I think that's the rub. And I think you and I battled over this, but your data here is I mean, what you're talking about is directing state funds where they're needed, as opposed to on a uniform basis.
Yeah, yes, the premise on the formula which Bill and you, Dave, and Mel put together there. Bill, you put it together, probably, or Dick, excuse me, was built upon that DOE 25 form, right? Wasn't it? It was about $20,000 or so. What was?
No, it was B-rated. It's like 17 something.
So it's 17 plus. Okay.
Well, it was based on. It was not based on the average cost for a student. It was based on all of. Sorry, I didn't have my speaker on. The commission study analyzed all of the DOE 25 reports from FY19, because we did the study in 20. And Dick, correct me. I mean, I'm hoping if I'm getting this right here. And it looked at how districts spent their budgets and normalized that with what the outcomes were in those districts.
Was there an assumption that due to the fact that New Hampshire consistently is seen in comparison to the rest of the states in America, that we have very good achievement? And so is there an assumption made then this average, whatever it is, amount for the pupil cost should be enough to maintain that level of achievement for all?
Yeah, so I think that works when looking at the state as a whole, but when you start looking at individual school districts, the average student in Manchester does not necessarily isn't identical to the average student in New Hampshire, and so the student characteristics in Manchester are very different than the average student characteristics across the state. So what the commission study found is that in some districts, the average cost per student in order to achieve a statewide outcome, this very strong statewide average outcome, is going to cost more than in other districts, and so that I think what the commission's findings really move us away from a uniform cost and fund model to a cost model that is specific by district, because every district is, well, not every district's totally different, but the student the challenges that Manchester has just aren't the same as the challenges that Hopkinton has or that Hanover has. And it's not the same as the challenges that Berlin has.
So take a look at Tamworth on your sheet there. Tamworth has a free and reduced population of 54%. So it's a poverty-stricken area, according to that. Their equalized property valuation, though, is 1.3 million, which is, on the high side compared to many. And yet their proficiency area in mathematics is 26%, and they're spending $28,000 per student.
Yeah, and they've got 185 kids out of the
185 kids,
out of the
yeah.
160,000 that we've got statewide.
So how does this formula we're talking about address this particular need of that town?
Well, I could take a look at the remember we developed through our consultants with AIR, developed a district calculator, and we could specifically look at Tamworth. And see what it would recommend for a funding level.
Representative Luna, don't forget Tamworth is only an elementary school.
See, I
Yes,
yeah.
yes, it is.
It's not a whole system.
yeah,
Okay.
that's good to know. And the AIR research, did take a look at what age groups are being served, and that all got factored, and that's why going through the MS-25 in detail is really essential when determining a funding model, and not just looking at the
That's what
average
people
dollar
think with
spent.
K-12.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So could you then, when you're looking at that calculator for that particular community, compared to what they receive now by the current formula, what would they be receiving in the foundation program that you're proposing?
So, let me get Tamworth. So we're talking about Tamworth. Let me pull up the calculator. I don't have it.
Yeah.
So go, Rick. This is going to take me a minute.
Okay, so when you get that,
Yeah.
yes, Representative Cornell.
Thank you. Are there ways to look at other things? Like I think in our discussion the other day, we talked about how students in Manchester at certain elementary schools enter school not ready to learn at all, not even knowing their colors, or where maybe in Lebanon, because they've had parents sitting home with them, reading with them, or they've gone to preschool for 3 years old, 4 years old, and they're entering school probably reading. So is there a way to know if Tamworth, are they entering school, first grade maybe, not ready to learn because and so by third grade, they've not caught up and their test scores will be lower because they're not entering with that advantage that other districts might have entered with.
See, Patricia, Representative Cornell.
That's okay.
Okay. You're sort of going down the path I'm going down, that there are a number of non-financial associated issues which may control, to some degree, the kids that are coming to school. Education in the family, aspiration of the family, aspiration of the community, economics within and demand for jobs within the community. Leadership in the building, which I think is absolutely in mind, number one, that leaderships, it sets tone and with staff on how learning progresses. And some of those issues, you may say, yeah, it's associated to some degree with money. However, we have schools which are performing very well in some of these communities where the per pupil, equalized valuation per pupil is low, and the ability of the town to support through property taxes is also low, but they're achieving. And I come down to the fact that all the time, how do we measure the effectiveness of leadership? Is that part of why we're seeing some schools down and some schools up?
But if we target the money toward the communities where the kids are entering school at a disadvantage, could those communities not use that money to provide a preschool program for those kids, or to target programs to kindergarten, first grade, second grade to catch them up? Have smaller classrooms, have more reading and math advantage classes.
I think we've been doing that in many schools, that through the Title I program funds and all, you'll see some schools saying, well, we're going to keep the pupil-teacher ratio low in the grade schools, but expand it as we get up in the grades, hoping that we can do some of the things you're talking about prior to getting to grade 3. So that's part of the equation. I also handed out another sheet to you, this one right here, which just came in a educational journal just this week. and it shows that similar access to effective teachers for low and high income students is the same. So it's, you have some teachers that are effective and some that are not effective. These exist in the same, at the same level in wealthy towns where you have a wealthy population and those where you have a more of a poverty level. Representative Lekes?
Yeah, I had two comments on the overall thing. One is the fact that we're heading for or aiming for the average, and we may be top in, or one of the top in the country, but that's not saying much. We're like 33rd in the developed world. And I don't think the proficiencies, what was it, 42.5 or something like that, is something we should be aiming at. I think we should be aiming above that. I think we should be aiming at proficiency as opposed to average proficiency. And the other thing is, given that both from things we see here and from that graph we saw, there isn't super good correlation between money spent and outcome, and we've seen that looking on it, but we've saw that there. And so one of the things I really like about this program is the whole section on for failing schools. As far as I'm concerned, 42.5 is a failing school and 65 is a failing school. We're talking about proficiency. We're not talking about excellency. We're just talking about proficiency. And so I think that should be applied before we start divvying up money or changing money. I think we need a couple years of apply that whole section where they have to come up with a program for how they're going to improve their outcomes. They're going to have, all that whole section. That's a great section. I say, let's put that in place. Give it a chance to, have effect, and then look at it and see where we're at before we start divvying money when money doesn't seem to have any real correlation to outcome.
So, couple things on that point, and I agree. I think the accountability section in 1680 is very strong, but at the same time, we need to have a level playing field to make sure that well, there's a couple things that districts have access to the resources they need in order to have effective instruction and programming in their districts. And it's really clear from the work that the commission did and the report that Jen and Rick have provided that districts, many districts just don't have access to the to even the resources for even a basic budget. But another important objective behind the commission's work, and I agree, I would love to have all of New Hampshire students, or the average student performance in New Hampshire, much higher than it is right now. I mean, being top 5 in the U.S., yeah, that's better than being bottom 5 in the U.S., but you're right, compared to the rest of the world, we could be doing a lot better than that. But one of the commission's objectives here was really closing the opportunity gap. So it wasn't to increase the average student performance in New Hampshire, but to increase the average student in performance where in many districts it's so far from the average in New Hampshire that these kids just can't get a fair shake. And unfortunately, Patty, you're always at the end of this with Manchester. Manchester and Newport, student performance is at the bottom of the state, and both are challenged economically. Both have Manchester has significant student populations that come from low socioeconomic backgrounds, and how many languages are spoken? 60 something in the Manchester School District. You know, Newport doesn't have those same challenges, but they have other challenges. And the, you know, the objective was really to close those opportunity gaps. And I'm hoping that the legislature will see an opportunity here and not say, well, you know, average in New Hampshire isn't high enough, and until we see it, you know, double or be better than pick another country, that we do nothing. Because I think that's where too many kids are just being left out of our economy right now. And you know, we could be doing a lot better with the money that the state is currently spending. That's another big point of 1680. That it's not saying, hey, we need to put in some, you know, additional huge tranche of state dollars. It's not saying that. And I think it recognizes some very practical things too, that while certainly the Manchester School District is the most underfunded in absolute dollars, because it's also the largest, that the Manchester School District wouldn't be able to absorb, you know, all in 1 year, that complete tranche of money. So it would be phased in over a decade, and similarly, the any sort of tax rate impacts that districts might see would have transition grants that would be phased out over 5 years, and so reducing the taking the shock out of the system, and I do have the information for Tamworth
Okay.
also, Rick.
Yes, Representative Ford?
I'm a bit concerned that this is seen only.
Thank you. I'm a bit concerned that this is seen only from the lens of the financial part of it. I'm familiar with students in Manchester specifically. I don't have their names, but I know who they are. And they come from non-English speaking families, and they are knocking the socks off their competitive English speaking people in various programs. And it's not because they are disadvantaged in some ways. They take that and run with it. They're in a program now for developing their own businesses in high school. And this is coming from another source outside the school system. So I don't accept this data as being valid because it doesn't speak to the aspirations or the education of the parents. And I think you'll find more answers to this problem there than you will find. Several of you may remember when I was showing a book around about children and work in the workforce with Lewis Hines, the photographs, and pointed out members of my own family, barefoot, picking cotton in North Texas cotton fields. What I didn't say in that, though, was every single person in that photograph had all of their children go to college, and 5 of them got PhDs. And these were cotton pickers, barefoot, with no money. I think you're missing a big point of the point here when you say it's only about the finances in the community. There are whole cultural things at work here. And I think in addition to this chart here, we ought to know, what are the educational backgrounds of the parents? What do we get plus or minus from that?
So what data are you taking?
From the people my wife is working with.
No, that's not what I'm saying. Is it the proficiency scores?
Well, just the economically disadvantaged students. And you're assuming that performance is not necessarily going to be good unless their economics are improved. It's not simply a matter of economics, is my point.
Right, but the DOE data that has been collected and was presented to us 2 weeks ago, and this is on the iExplore function that Nate and his colleague.
This is iExplore.
Yeah,
that's it too. Yes.
This is the data that Jen used, and it's got a correlation of minus 0.68, which is pretty strong correlation between economic disadvantaged students and lower proficiency in math.
I think I understand that there is a relationship between being economically disadvantaged and performance. We've gotten that data. We've had it over a number of years.
But I mean, I'm hearing from Oliver that he doesn't believe that data.
My concern is that there are situations which don't necessarily follow what we see for the whole. And
Absolutely.
I'm concerned that in any kind of a formula which we develop, there should be accountability for sure. We just handed this sheet, and I'm going to look at where Representative Woodcock comes from here, Conway. And look at the equalized property valuation, look at the per pupil expenditure per child costs, and look at their achievement scores. They're not good. But see, they have a valuation of $1.5 million per pupil. And they're spending $18,000 per pupil. They have a 38% free and reduced population. So, but with that type of revenue available to them, shouldn't they have this score higher? If we're going to pour more money into sending to other districts in hopes it's going to improve those districts, but we see in fact, unless money is specifically targeted, which we cannot do under the current Constitution interpretations, that's what I understand. I'm not a lawyer, but we cannot target differentiated aid and base adequacy money. That is basically going to the town and school district, and they use it. Do they use it for these students? I don't know. So are there other issues here that come into play? I'm all for many components within the foundation formula. Believe me, I advocate for weighted amounts of money for various categories which are unfunded by the federal government. And we're not receiving that from the state either. And that's costing us a significant problem in our schools. So how do we address my concerns here, Dave?
Yeah. So I think first of all, it starts with defining and costing an adequate education. And currently we define an adequate education as a classroom with 30 students, a teacher, 1/500th of a principal, a principal for every 500 students, one librarian for 500 students. It's a bag of stuff that at the end of the day costs about $4,000. And we've heard, I think, from our many hearings over the last several years that there's no school district, no public school in the state that would be able to put on anything close to what they consider to be an adequate education for $4,000.
Okay, let's start with that conversation right there.
Yeah.
So if the base adequacy right now is $4,000, and we're basing that on a formula which is 25-1 for K through 3, I believe, and 4 through 12, it's 30-1. In the task force back in 2018, I had recommended that we drop that down to 20 and 25. Now, if we drop down K through 3 and taking our K3 students, that's 4 grade levels, and with 164,000 kids, divide, you can find how many kids that is, multiply it by an additional sum of money which would be going out to based upon that formula. Is that not a way to address and fix our funding?
Absolutely. And in fact, that's what 1680 does, is it recommends a base amount of
$5,000.
Yeah, it's like $5,000 to $6,000. So it's a little bit higher than we currently have. And then it has a differentiated aid.
Weighted values.
It's weighted values, but it's the same basic thing as our differentiated, the additional dollars for special education, English language learners, free and reduced lunch, And 1680 does not do third grade reading, but it does a school size
That's, yeah.
aspect of it. And we can argue over all of these things, but what the base plus these differentiated factors do is get you closer to what a school district's budget would look like to educate all of its students. So for places like Hopkinton, hey, I represent Hopkinton, people of Hopkinton, but Hopkinton's, for Hopkinton's average student to perform at a statewide average, Hopkinton doesn't have to be spending what its current budget is. So for places like Hopkinton and Hanover, it ends up being with a lower predicted budget for those school districts. For places like Manchester, it ends up being a significantly higher predicted budget.
Dave, this seems to be a discussion between you and I.
Yeah.
So Hanover, we know is a well-educated community, and you look on the chart here, and their achievement score is going to be wonderful.
Yep. And they're spending, and they've got strong budget.
Yeah. And so, and you look at Hopkinton, or you look at Haverhill,
Yeah.
you're going to see not the type of results that you see in Hanover.
Now Hopkinton, you get those results
So
pretty
under
close
the
to those.
Claremont decision right now in Londonderry and all that, we have to allocate to these students the same amount of money regardless of poverty or
Correct.
wealth.
So
So how's this formula that you have get around that decision of the courts?
okay. So we don't believe it's getting around the decision of the courts because we don't believe I don't believe, I shouldn't say we don't believe. I don't believe, and particularly with advice and discussion from two lawyers who we all, Mel and you and I have worked with, Dick Ames, Bill Ardinger, have been through every step in this. Don't believe that that's what the court meant by that, and the court had never seen a formula like what we're proposing in 1680, which is directing the precious state resources to where they're needed. Currently, Hanover gets the same amount per student from the state as Pittsfield does, as Berlin does,
Per pupil.
as Rye and Newcastle do, and all of those towns have significantly different access to financial resources, but they get the same amount of funding from the state of New Hampshire. All 1680 is doing, I mean, among the, in addition to the accountability section and the the property tax relief section and stuff like that, is taking the $1 billion that the state raises, $650 million from business profits tax, business enterprise tax, and a smattering of other taxes, plus the $363 million it gets from the statewide property tax, and pushes that out to make sure that districts can fund reasonable budgets. Because if we say, as a legislature, that a reasonable budget is $4,200 per student, or whatever it is right now, base plus adequacy, we're I don't know what we're saying, because it's not rooted in anybody's reality. It's not rooted in Manchester's reality, and it's not rooted in Hanover's reality. It's not rooted in any reality. But if we recognize that reasonable district budgets for an adequate education, for a statewide education, should range anywhere from, and I'm not looking at the numbers, but they're gonna have a range depending upon the student and district characteristics, anywhere from $15,000 per student to $24,000 per student, something like that. That as long as these school districts can raise the first dollars locally and get the last dollars they need to make them whole on a predicted budget for that district, then the state, I think, is doing the job the courts and the Constitution really intended, but the courts haven't ever seen New Hampshire do anything like that before. Dick can talk about this a lot.
Well, you're talking about the Massachusetts model here.
I'm talking about the Massachusetts model, and my understanding from Dick and from Bill is that the Massachusetts Constitution is very similar to the New Hampshire Constitution when it pertains to our obligation to educate our children. I got a nod from Dick on that, so I think
Representative Leckers.
Yeah, we keep talking about how much a town spends for per pupil spending, and I'm saying it's a whole lot more complicated than that. You look at, for instance, Lisbon Regional, their equalized valuation per pupil is only 634,000, whereas Manchester, it's 805,000. You look at their economically disadvantaged, and they're fairly close. They're in the same ballpark. And yet, the average cost per pupil for Lisbon is 17,000 and Manchester is 12,000. Well, the big difference, so number one, the people in the town vote for what their spending is. And number two, they're completely different sizes. One is huge, one is at the top end and the other is at the bottom end. And so you can't just look at, 12,000. You got to realize that there's a lot of savings due to size, right?
Yeah, but Patty should be here for this conversation.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize she had left.
But the city of Manchester has other extraordinary needs, because it's so much larger than any other city or town in the state. And I believe it also has a tax cap. And I don't think the voters in Manchester approve the school budget.
No.
I don't know how it's not left to the voters in Manchester. It's the council.
But it's not the but it's not the state either. It's still the locals, whether it's the people elected by the locals who do it, but it's not the state who does it. But my point is, they still have a lot more equalized valuation per pupil than Lisbon does. And yet Lisbon spends more per pupil, and how much of that is because they vote to spend more, and how much of that is just because there's economy of scale. It's very complicated is what I'm saying, and you can't just look at the property values. You can't just look at the amount they're spending, because how much of that comes from what? It's way more complicated. And so basing on these simple things, you can see right there, it doesn't work.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to get down into the weeds of 1680, but it does recognize that there are efficiencies for larger school districts. So in those areas, Manchester actually does not receive any benefit because of its school size in terms of predicted costs. However, it does have such a high number of English language learners that it does receive differentiated aid for that. And again, just looking at the school and student related factors, but I think Patty could probably tell you about a lot of other factors outside of the Manchester School District that affect the total tax rate that Manchester residents pay for, fire and police, safety, and other things that go way beyond what a lot of other towns.
Representative Tanner?
Yeah, I'm just looking at the sheet that was passed out for 2019, which was an unusual year. And it's a one-year snapshot of the schools in the state. And you're bound to have outliers. And the smaller the school is, the more variation you're going to get over a number of years. So if you really wanted to, compare data a little bit better, I would suggest that you do a 5-year average. And certainly COVID changed a lot of scores and everything else. I think the other thing is that you need to look at apples to apples. When you're looking at the proficiency of kids in the United States or New Hampshire versus the United States or versus other countries, it's not apples to apples. And I guess my third point is that And it goes to what Dave's been speaking about. There's so many factors within the community, and the longer the community has had a poorer performing school like Newport, more poverty, less industry or professional people moving into the area because they come, they have a job, and they say, okay, where's the best school district in the area? Newport doesn't get the nod. And so it's become a lot of slumlords that have bought up property from out of state that just let the property go, which exacerbates the whole, it's a spiral that goes down. So even if when you at least start something like this, it's going to take a while for things to actually make any kind of turnaround. But it certainly is, at least from living in Sunapee, representing Newport, representing some other towns that I did in my floterial, Dave's right. There's a lot of factors. The preschool, how many parents actually send their kids to preschool? That would be one question I'd have with Tamworth versus maybe Newport. They certainly offer preschool, but how many parents send them to preschool? So, we're dealing with children and we're dealing with learners, and learners are hard to fit in pegs. They're not widgets like in a business. So whenever you try to make data and data points, it's difficult, and there's going to be outliers, and you try to do an average so that you get to see it. And, in those schools with 42% math, you might have a couple of really math whizzes, and you might have a couple of kids that have numerophoria or whatever it is, that's like dyslexia with math. I mean, we don't even take that into account like we do dyslexia and some of the other issues that we've identified in reading. So I would just caution everybody about grabbing these and looking at Lisbon or looking at Tamworth. 2019 again wasn't a great year, and certainly it's a 1 year flash of what's happening in New Hampshire schools.
In response to that, Representative Tanner, we're taking the information that we have available to us, and it's limited from DOE. We can go back further, and some of these low math scores, which we're talking about, are nothing that's been a result of, not necessarily a result of the pandemic.
2019 is actually pre-pandemic.
That's pre-pandemic. So we're looking at, but we are looking at seeking more information. That's the purpose of the analyst over at DOE, to do that so we can track one cohort as they grow through the grades. One thing about Lisbon, you're looking at Lisbon there, and that's within my area. Lisbon, if you drive down 302, it looks like a bomb went off in places. It's not a very, very wealthy community at all. But their scores are above proficiency in both mathematics and in language arts reading. And it's because they have outstanding leadership and staff in that school. I've seen it. They have a wonderful athletic program too in soccer. I can tell you that. They've beaten Haverhill. So Haverhill just won the state championship the other night in that division. But at any rate, the school district also relies with a very close relationship in Lisbon with New England Wire, which is a company which does business throughout this world and in fiber optics and all that. And it's huge. So there are these outliers that have high proficiency in there or above the proficiency level that are weak on the equalized property valuation, as Lisbon is. If you look at that, you're going to see it well below $1 million, I'm sure. And then if you look at their achievement scores, they're just a little shallow of the 50% mark. They're well above the 42% mark, probably 47, 49 in that area. So how do we direct the money to these particular districts? And if you look at their poverty level, it's well up above what, 50%? So they're one that has the poverty. They have these very unique and difficult issues, but somehow they're showing good achievement in terms of where we place the bar. And I understand sometimes, Representative Luno, the bar is too low to the ground for proficiency. And we got, in terms of our academic standards, maybe we got to raise that a little bit so we can really compete worldwide and direct more attention to how we're teaching and identifying what our curriculum should be. Representative Mylan.
Yeah, let's step back just a moment. When the current system was created, years ago, way before all of our times, they really only had one thing to look at, and that was to look at things. This is what David said earlier. Things. This is the input model, the way we're currently funding schools. Things based upon average salary of teachers, percent of principals, how many desks you've got there. That's all they had at that point in time. And they came up with a formula, and they have, okay, based upon that, everybody gets $4,000, period. That was okay then. They did not have the data sets that we currently have. If you look to see what the Department of Education has been able to do with the Form 25, et cetera, we've looked at some of the data that they've had, there's a whole new set of criteria that you can base how we fund schools. And I think what 1680 is trying to do is to say, okay, let's take this new data we've got and let's see how we might be able to reallocate the current way we're funding schools and reallocate them in a way that's going to help those areas that need more help. So that's one point. So just think about the old system and a potentially new system based upon data that we didn't have when the old system was created. The second thing that we haven't talked about here yet, and that is what the commission really focused on too, is that how do we make sure that students in this state have equal access to an adequate education? And that's being focused on how do we create a workforce within this state that there is some comparability around the state. So if you want to have a business that's going to go into Claremont, for example, or Newport, they can look at the students there and say, gee, these kids have the same kind of an opportunity as they do in Hanover and Portsmouth and in Hopkinton, et cetera. And so the question is how do we as state officials begin to look at how do we look at all students across the state to make sure that they have an equal access to a good education. And let's face it, in some school districts, they have great access. Other school districts, they don't have access. And by the way, we've got data now that can tell you that. And back to the point that was made earlier, right now, when we allocate funds to schools, there is no way to say, well, is it being effective? This system, for the first time, has an opportunity to say, hey, school districts, let's see exactly how well you're doing. And if you're not doing well, there's a 5-year plan here in this system, I think it's 5 years, to begin to move to see where you are at the end of that 5 years if you've gotten additional money. That's never happened before. That's why I think that what the commission's work did, it revolutionizes the way we fund schools, and it revolutionizes the way we look at how we can help kids who may be in those school districts that don't have the same opportunities as other kids that are in more wealthy school districts. So Rick, I just wanted to make those 2 points of how we funded it. It's obsolete right now based upon the data that we have. And secondly, how do we begin to reallocate the current funds, not additional money coming into the state, the current amount of money that we're spending, how do we reallocate that in a more effective way than we currently have as a one-size-fits-all? Thank you.
Representative Cordelli.
Just following up on that, maybe we should look at the CSI and TSI schools who are the lowest performing. They're getting additional resources, additional funds. What happens after 5 years in those schools? Are they showing improvement? We should look at that as well.
Representative Luno.
So thanks, Rick. And this has been a good, robust discussion. I think that's important. But I think one of the things that maybe, and Rick, I think you are really moving us to focus on this, and maybe this should really be the focus on this, is whether or not the legislature believes that the state is obligated to fund the first and last dollar of for public education, for public schools, or whether it can direct or target state funds where they're needed most.
David,
And-
explain the first and last dollar.
And so first and last dollar, I think that this goes to what Mel was saying in terms of how antiquated our school funding approach is. But it's been, New Hampshire has always lowballed this cost of inadequate education. I think even the current cost of inadequate education was created to make sure it fit within whatever funds were coming from the state of New Hampshire, and packaged to be to comply with the interpretation of a Supreme Court decision saying New Hampshire's got to pay for all of it, define an adequate education and pay for all of it. So while we've got school districts that are spending, like Waterville Valley, average $43,732 per student. And just to keep us on the same page, Rochester, $14,021 per student. Doesn't matter. You're going to get $4,200 per student from the state, whether you need it or not. So Waterville Valley spending $43,000 per student, Rochester spending $14,000 per student. Both get the same amount of funding from the state, and both have very different student outcomes as well, based on the report that Jen provided. So I would have a hard time imagining, out of fairness, that and out of student fairness for students, that I don't want to presume what the Supreme Court's going to do, but I'm not an attorney. But you look at something like this, it doesn't say, it doesn't yell out to me that, oh yeah, the state's just got to provide the first and last dollar, the first of the $4,200, first and last dollar of a lowballed cost of inadequate education, where this is what districts are spending, this is what districts are able to raise through local property taxes. And in Waterville Valley, that's $43,732 with 2019 math proficiency at 89%. And Rochester, $14,021 with math proficiency at 43%. And the state says, yep, we're just going to buy the same stuff, pay for the same stuff at the same amount for both of these school districts.
Well, picking Waterville Valley is kind of a,
Yeah, but they're both on the same page.
we all know what that is.
But you know what? It even makes the point even more valid, because if Waterville Valley, through its local property taxes, can go above and beyond the $4,200 per student it gets from the state and raise another $30,000 per student to pay for public schools, why are we even sending them the $4,200 to begin with? I mean, I think it puts a serious question into what our priorities are as a state, and to say that Waterville Valley, you're going to get it, and Manchester and Rochester, you're going to get the same.
Well, within our own statutes, not even going to the Constitution, it's a shared responsibility.
Yeah.
And so, this is a healthy discussion, and there's a lot to it. Now, what I'd also like to do is just take a moment here, because I know we're getting on lunch, but I'd just like to say that there are certain strengths to the 1680 that I have always appreciated, and the performance outcome, we need to be measuring students and making sure that the dollar is achieving what we want it to do. The accountability section is strong. There's no reason why we shouldn't be lifting that accountability section and putting it into everything we do. But there has to be accountability for the dollars that the state is raising to support schools. There's got to be. The other thing which I think is important is that there's certain areas that we have where those differentiated aid elements, very difficult. I know when I was years ago up in Anchorage where we had 48 different languages in the school. And that community, it was a smaller, about 250,000 people living in Anchorage itself. And that was very, very difficult to raise the dollars necessary to hit that specific need of English language learners. And special education as well, when the federal government copped out and what they said they were going to be doing. And so we are picking up the difference, and especially the locals picking up a tremendous unfunded amount of money. That's where the weighted formula, I don't know if I necessarily agree of multiplying 4.2 or something like that times the 5,000 added on, but the whole principle and the concept is good. Lastly, there's other areas like that which I appreciate. I'm not so sure of using the DOE 25 form. I don't want to go into that. You've heard me before on that. As trying to set some kind of a funding amount to start with to ensure that we're going to provide that adequate education, or that where we want that bar and the hold accountability for. But no matter what we do, we're always going to fall in that hole that 90, 95, I would say close to 100% of all the states are doing. You don't fund based on program, you fund upon what's in the state till. And you make it work. And that's what we've done in this state since Augenblick to the current Senator Estabrook formula, to what we've done in 18 and what we're doing right now. It's always been, well, we have this type of dollar, we'll figure out a formula to equate to that dollar. It's not about program. And that's typical throughout this country, though. It's very much so. Maybe Massachusetts is an outlier, I don't know. But I'm sure that there's some issues down there still with some of those towns that were poor. They're probably having to kick in a little bit more. So that's my 2 cents right now. I think what we need to do is, Ralph, in a second, we're not going to come to resolution on this at this moment. I know we're not, but I think there's some areas where we can meet and move forward. And I'd like to work with Rep. Sanluno here in trying to resolve that. So when we come together at the next meeting, which will be on the 24th, we're going to have to make a recommendation on this. Whether we move that, say the whole bill is wonderful the way it is, it should move forward. I don't think that's going to get, a pass like that. But there are a lot of elements within it and a lot of principles and concepts behind it, which should be moving forward into whatever we do in education funding in the upcoming year here. We're getting back into a hold harmless there with that, 5 years of hold harmless. Well, if that's going to last just for 5 years, that's not too bad, but I will not go anywhere with stabilization ever again with any formula. And I hope we all agree on that. So there are some points of agreement that we can come together on. So Rep. Zambon, did you have a comment?
Just a comment on, because when I studied this some years ago, and I looked in Manchester, I'm just wondering if that 12,000 per student includes the millions they get from the federal government for the foreign students, the English language learners, because I know that was a lot of money some years ago. And I'm just wondering if that's part of the 12,000 or is that just state and local? So I think that's something we
You're not
need to look
talking
at.
grant programs like bilingual education?
No, I'm
migrant
talking about.
education?
Yeah, but I remember looking at the different data some years ago, and it was the amount of money that Manchester and even Nashville, but Manchester even more, for the number of students that the federal government was paying at the time for English language learners and that kind of issue. So I'm wondering if that.
There are federal dollars in ESSER for that.
Right, but now this was.
Is that in the 12,000? That's the question.
Yeah, is that part of the 12,000? Yeah, and yeah.
That's all there. Yes.
Including federal dollars.
And it has revenues as well.
Yeah.
Revenues, expenditures, and assets.
No, that's interesting. 12,000 and all that.
Yeah. Representative Woodcock.
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to go back to a comment you made a minute ago about the historical perspective of budget preparation. Just went through back in the series of, and I think that's the antithesis of where we want to be. I think we have to create a plan, then budget the plan, which this does, versus create a budget and back into a plan. And that's the historical perspective. You take the dollar and you back into it. I think we have to look at the other way, create what we need to do, or create the plan, and then budget that versus just take and divide. I just following up because I disagree with you.
Program budgeting.
I understand your historical perspective, but I think it's the wrong process.
And Rick, I think, and you mentioned it before too, and I think it's important to recognize that 1680, really establishes a framework, and more than anything else. I mean, obviously it's got a lot of details in there, but the framework is really important. And that framework relies on both a shared responsibility between state and local, between the state and the city or town, and what it's, recognizing that cities and towns have different resources, and that the state can come in with its precious dollars and deploy them where they're needed most, and I think that really is, I think, in the spirit of the partnership that we have between locals and the state, really, as opposed to a first and last dollar approach that doesn't get any school district anywhere close to an operating budget.
Thank you. Yes. Okay.
I'll be down.
Okay.
Starting.
Yeah. Oh, you're starting at 1? Okay. Good. Thank you.
Yeah, it's on the LSR. I sent you an email, but
Which LSR?
the one you asked me to co-sponsor.
Can't remember which one that was. Okay. Okay, is there any more discussion for today? We will deal with this on the 24th.
On a different topic, for those who served with a New Barbara Shaw, I just want to say Manchester named a park in her honor in her ward in Manchester, a recreational park with I think it was a soccer or softball field and children's equipment to play on, and really nice memorial to her. So it was really nice.
They need to put a dog park there.
That's wonderful. I can't even name the number of people I've run into that knew Barbara Shaw, and both up at Plymouth State, where that was her school, and whenever I talk to folks down this way and I reference, I knew a teacher, a representative from there, and they say, oh, Barbara Shaw. Yeah, she's dearly loved. Representative Mullen, is your hand up or just waving? Just agreeing. Well, thank you very much, everybody. We will adjourn this one, and we'll come back and we'll have to deal with this as the whole on the 24th.
Can you shut off your mic?
I can